On the storm-battered shores of Tortuga, young Finn Blackwater pulls a shivering donkey from the wreckage of a merchant vessel. The crew of the Crimson Revenge erupts in laughter as their youngest member wraps his coat around the trembling animal. Captain Redbeard shakes his head in disgust, while the other pirates mock Finn for wasting time on such a pathetic creature. But as Finn secretly feeds scraps to the donkey and builds it shelter below deck, strange things begin happening aboard the ship. The donkey's eyes gleam with unusual intelligence, and its hooves seem to find their mark with deadly precision when danger strikes. What the crew doesn't know is that this innocent-looking animal carries the blood of the legendary war donkeys of ancient Greece, bred for battle and trained to protect. But how could a simple farm animal become the most feared companion on the seven seas? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass bell of the Crimson Revenge clanged with harsh authority as Captain Redbeard summoned his crew to the main deck. Finn stood at the ship's rail, one protective hand resting on the donkey's matted coat, watching the last remnants of the merchant vessel disappear beneath the churning waves. The animal pressed close to his side, still trembling from its ordeal in the cold Atlantic waters. "What in Neptune's beard is that mangy creature doing on my ship?" Captain Redbeard's voice boomed across the deck. His weathered face twisted in disbelief. His red beard, streaked with grey from decades at sea, bristled with indignation as he pointed a gnarled finger at the donkey. The crew gathered in a loose circle, their faces bearing the cruel amusement of men who had found fresh entertainment. Blackjack Pete, a scarred veteran with gold teeth gleaming in his grin, was the first to speak up. "Looks like our little Finn's found himself a girlfriend," Pete cackled, earning raucous laughter from the others. "Maybe he thinks it'll help him in the next port."
"Aye," chimed in Rutgut Sam, scratching at his scraggly beard, "though I've seen prettier lasses in Tortuga's taverns, and that's saying something." Finn's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "The poor thing was drowning, Captain. I couldn't just leave it to die." "Couldn't leave it to die," roared Iron Tooth Morrison, the ship's quartermaster. "Boy, we're pirates, not some bleeding heart rescue service. That beast will eat our supplies and take up precious space." Captain Redbeard studied the shivering animal with calculating eyes. The donkey was small, certainly no larger than a pony, with a dull brown coat that spoke of hard use and little care. Its ribs showed through its thin hide, and its legs trembled with exhaustion. Yet something in its dark eyes caught the captain's attention, an intelligence that seemed almost human. "The lad has a point about our supplies," the captain said slowly. "Every mouth to feed costs us profit." "Then let's throw it overboard now and save ourselves the trouble," suggested Cutlass Jim, his hand moving instinctively to the weapon at his side. The donkey's ears flattened against its head, and for a moment its dark eyes flashed with something that might have been defiant. Finn stepped forward, placing himself between the animal and the advancing pirates. "Please, Captain," Finn said, his voice carrying a quiet determination that surprised even himself. "I'll take full responsibility. I'll share my own rations with him, and I'll make sure he earns his keep somehow." The crew erupted in fresh laughter at this declaration. "Earns his keep," wheezed Pegleg Thompson. "What's it going to do, scrub the deck with its tail?" "Maybe it can stand watch," suggested another pirate. "Its braying will scare off enemy ships better than our cannons." Captain Redbeard held up a weathered hand for silence. The laughter died away, replaced by the creaking of rigging and the endless whisper of wind through the sails. He approached the donkey slowly, his boots clicking against the wet deck planks. The animal didn't flinch as the captain extended his hand, allowing the grizzled pirate to examine its head and neck. Redbeard's fingers traced along the donkey's muzzle, noting the strong jaw and alert ears. "What do you call this beast?" he asked. Finn had been thinking about this since pulling the animal from the wreckage. "Buccaneer," he said firmly. "His name is Buccaneer." The crew exploded in fresh mirth at this announcement. "Buccaneer," cried Blackjack Pete.
He's named his jackass after us. The only thing that donkey will be buccaneering is our hardtack, added Rotgut Sam. Captain Redbeard studied both boy and animal for a long moment. There was something in Finn's stance, a protective instinct that reminded the captain of his own younger days when he'd defended his first ship's cat from a cruel crew. And the donkey, despite its bedraggled appearance, carried itself with an odd dignity. "Very well," the captain said at last. "The beast can stay, but on one condition." He fixed Finn with a stern glare. "Any trouble it causes, any supplies it wastes, any problems it creates, you'll answer for them personally, and if it proves more burden than benefit, overboard it goes." "Thank you, Captain," Finn said, relief evident in his voice. As the crew dispersed with disappointed grumbles and a few more crude jokes, Finn knelt beside Buccaneer and whispered, "Don't worry, friend. I'll take care of you." The donkey turned its intelligent eyes toward the young pirate, and for just a moment, Finn could have sworn he saw understanding there, as if the animal knew exactly what had just transpired, and was grateful for the protection. The gentle melody of his mother's lullaby box drifted through the dim cargo hold as Finn carefully arranged a bed of old sailcloth for Buccaneer. The small music box, crafted from polished cherry wood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl, had been Margaret Blackwater's parting gift to her son before fever took her 3 winters past. Its delicate tune of Spanish ladies filled the cramped space with warmth that seemed to ease the donkey's trembling. "There now," Finn whispered, settling beside his new companion with a bowl of water and scraps he'd saved from his own meager supper. "This isn't much, but it's dry and safe." Buccaneer approached the offering cautiously, his hooves clicking softly against the wooden deck planks. The donkey's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of hard-tacked crumbs and dried fish, but his eyes remained fixed on Finn's face, studying the young pirate with an intensity that made the boy wonder what thoughts moved behind those dark, intelligent orbs. Above them, the crew's raucous laughter echoed through the ship as they celebrated another successful raid with rum and crude songs. Finn had excused himself from the festivities, claiming exhaustion, though in truth he'd grown weary of their constant jibes about his 4-legged sweetheart and donkey-loving ways. "They don't understand," he murmured, gently stroking Buccaneer's neck as the animal finally began to eat. "They see weakness where there should be compassion. My father would have done the same thing." The music box continued its sweet refrain, and Finn's thoughts drifted to memories of his childhood home on the Cornwall coast. His father, Thomas Blackwater, had been a merchant sailor of good reputation until Spanish privateers left him crippled and bitter. But even in his darkest moods, Thomas had never lost his kindness toward injured creatures, often bringing home wounded gulls or stray cats that Margaret would nurse back to health. "You miss him too, don't you?" Finn asked softly, watching as Buccaneer's ears swiveled toward the sound of his voice. "The person who cared for you before." As if responding to the question, Buccaneer lifted his head and gazed at Finn with an expression that seemed almost human in its sadness. The donkey's coat, now dry from the sea spray, revealed patterns of scars across his flanks. Not random marks of neglect, but precise lines that suggested deliberate training or perhaps battle wounds. Finn's fingers traced one of the longer scars, feeling the ridge of healed tissue beneath the coarse hair. "What happened to you, friend? These marks aren't from accident or mistreatment. They're too clean, too purposeful." The music box wound down to silence, its last notes fading like whispers in the ship's hull. In the quiet that followed, Finn became aware of Buccaneer's breathing, steady and calm now, and the subtle shift in the animal's posture as he settled into a more relaxed stance. "You understand me, don't you?" Finn said, his voice barely audible above the creak of rigging and the distant sound of waves against the hull. "Not just my tone or the kindness in my hands, but the actual words." Buccaneer's response was to step closer and rest his muzzle against Finn's shoulder, a gesture so deliberate and comforting that the young pirate felt tears prick at his eyes. Here in this forgotten corner of the ship, surrounded by coils of rope and barrels of supplies, he'd found something he hadn't realized he'd been searching for, a companion who saw him not as the crew's youngest member or Captain Redbeard's reluctant charity case, but simply as a friend worthy of trust. Heavy footsteps on the deck above reminded Finn that he couldn't linger too long without raising suspicion. He rose reluctantly, gathering the empty bowl and carefully winding his mother's music box. "I'll be back tomorrow night," he promised, running his hand along Buccaneer's neck one final time. "And I'll bring more food. Maybe some apples from the captain's private store if I can manage it." As he turned to leave, Buccaneer moved to block his path. Not aggressively, but with clear intent. The donkey's eyes held Finn's gaze for a long moment, and the young pirate had the strangest sensation that he was being evaluated, measured against some standard he couldn't understand. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the moment passed. Buccaneer stepped aside, allowing Finn to make his way back through the labyrinth of cargo toward the crew quarters. But as the young pirate climbed the narrow ladder to the main deck, he carried with him the certainty that this was no ordinary animal, and that their bond was something far deeper than simple human kindness toward a rescued creature. The music box grew warm in his pocket, as if responding to the strange new friendship looming in the ship's depth. The morning sun blazed overhead as the crew of the Crimson Revenge worked to secure their latest prize, a cargo of fine Spanish wine, destined for the governor's mansion in Port Royal. Finn watched from his position near the mainmast as 4 burly pirates struggled to move a single barrel across the deck, their faces red with exertion and cursing. "Come on, you lazy dogs," bellowed Iron-Tooth Morrison. "My grandmother could move cargo faster than this sorry lot." Buccaneer stood quietly beside Finn, observing the scene with those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The donkey had been allowed on deck for the first time since his rescue, though Captain Redbeard had made it clear this was a trial period to see if the animal would prove useful, rather than merely decorative. "Perhaps your pet could lend a hoof," sneered Blackjack Pete, sweat streaming down his scarred face as he strained against the heavy barrel. "Though I suppose it's only good for eating our supplies and making noise." Finn felt heat rise in his cheeks at the taunt, but before he could respond, something remarkable happened. Buccaneer stepped forward with calm deliberation, positioning himself beside the struggling pirates. The donkey lowered his head and placed his shoulder against the barrel, and with seemingly effortless grace began to push. The barrel, which had required 4 strong men to budge mere inches, suddenly rolled smoothly across the deck, as if it weighed no more than a sack of grain. The pirates stumbled backward in surprise, their mouths agape as they watched the small donkey guide the heavy container precisely to its designated spot near the ship's rail. "Well, I'll be keel-hauled," whispered Pegleg Thompson, his wooden appendage clicking against the deck as he shifted his weight in amazement. But the crew's astonishment quickly transformed into dismissive laughter. "Lucky push," declared Rotgut Sam, wiping ale from his beer. "Even a broken compass points true twice a day." "Aye," agreed Cutlass Jim, "probably just the angle of the deck and a bit of momentum. Nothing more than dumb luck." Finn knew better. He'd watched Buccaneer's movements carefully. The precise placement of hooves, the calculated angle of approach, the controlled application of strength. There had been nothing random or fortunate about the donkey's action. This was skill, pure and simple, though he kept this observation to himself. That evening, while the crew celebrated their successful raid in the galley, Finn made his way to the ship's modest library. A collection of navigational charts, weather almanacs, and a few volumes on natural philosophy that Captain Redbeard had accumulated over the years. By flickering candlelight, he searched through dusty tomes for any reference to unusual donkey breeds or exceptional equine ability. Most of the texts offered little beyond basic husbandry advice, but in a worn volume titled Creatures of the Ancient Mediterranean, Finn discovered a passage that made his pulse quicken. The author described legendary war donkeys bred by the ancient Greeks, animals of extraordinary strength and intelligence that served alongside warriors in the great battles of antiquity. These remarkable beasts, the text proclaimed, possessed not only physical prowess far exceeding that of common domestic donkeys, but also demonstrated tactical awareness and loyalty that made them invaluable companions in warfare. It was said that such animals could sense danger before human perception detected it, and their courage in battle was legend throughout the known world. Finn's dreams that night were filled with images of bronze-armored warriors riding alongside powerful donkeys through dust and smoke, their voices raised in ancient battle cries. He saw vast armies clashing on windswept plains, while intelligent donkeys moved with purpose through the chaos, their riders trusting these remarkable animals to guide them safely through the storm of war. When he woke before dawn, still groggy from the vivid dreams, Finn made his way quietly to the cargo hold where Buccaneer waited. The donkey greeted him with what seemed like anticipation, as if he too had been expecting this visit. "I've been reading about your kind," Finn whispered, settling beside his companion with fresh water and the last of his breakfast biscuit. "Ancient warriors had donkeys like you, didn't they? Animals bred for battle and trained to fight." Buccaneer's response was to nuzzle Finn's pocket, where the young pirate kept a fragment of leather he'd discovered tangled in the donkey's mane during grooming. Examining it more closely by lantern light, Finn realized it wasn't random debris from the shipwreck, but rather a piece of worked leather bearing intricate patterns that seemed almost ceremonial in their design. The fragment was small, no larger than his palm, but the craftsmanship was extraordinary. Thin strands of what appeared to be gold thread were woven through the leather in complex geometric patterns, reminiscent of ancient Greek art. At its center was the faded image of a horse's head, noble and proud, surrounded by symbols that Finn couldn't decipher but which seemed to speak of honor and nobility. As he held the fragment up to the lantern's glow, Buccaneer watched intently, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing flame with an intensity that sent shivers down Finn's spine. The cry from the crow's nest shattered the peaceful morning as the Crimson Revenge sailed through the calm waters off Jamaica. "Ship ahoy! 3 points off the starboard bow." Captain Redbeard lowered his spyglass with a grimace that spoke of old grudges and unfinished business. "It's the Serpent's Tooth," he announced to his gathered crew. "Captain Steelheart has found us at last." A collective groan rose from the assembled pirates. Every man aboard knew the name of Captain Magnus Steelheart, a ruthless privateer who commanded the fastest ship in the Caribbean and bore a personal vendetta against anyone who had crossed his path. His cutlass, forged from steel salvaged from a Spanish treasure galleon, was as famous for its razor edge as for the blood it had spilled in pursuit of revenge. Finn stood at the rail beside Buccaneer, watching the approaching vessel grow larger on the horizon. The Serpent's Tooth was indeed a formidable sight. Sleek black hull, cutting through the waves like a predator stalking prey, her sails full-bellied with wind, and her crew visible as dark figures swarming across her deck in preparation for confrontation. "What does Steelheart want with us?" asked Rotgut Sam, unconsciously checking the pistol at his belt. Captain Redbeard's weathered face darkened with memory. "Last summer we relieved him of a cargo shipment he'd been tracking for weeks. Cost him a fortune in prize money, and Steelheart's not the forgiving type." As the enemy ship drew closer, Finn could make out more details through the morning haze. Captain Steelheart stood at his vessel's prow like a figurehead carved from granite, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair tied back in a warrior's knot, and scars crisscrossing his face like a map of past battles. His famous cutlass hung at his side, its ornate hilt catching the sunlight with deadly promise. "Ahoy, Crimson Revenge!" Steelheart's voice carried across the water with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Prepare to be boarded for inspection." "Like hell we will," muttered Blackjack Pete, but his bravado sounded hollow in the face of the approaching threat. The crew of the Serpent's Tooth had already lowered boats and were rowing toward them with grim efficiency. Finn counted at least 20 armed men, their weapons glinting in the morning sun. These weren't desperate cutthroats like so many Caribbean pirates. These were disciplined fighters who moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit. "Stand ready, lads," Captain Redbeard commanded, though his tone suggested he knew their odds were poor. "We'll parley first, but keep your steel close." As the enemy boats drew alongside, Finn noticed something peculiar about Buccaneer's behavior. The donkey, normally calm and observant, had become visibly agitated, His ears were pinned flat against his head, his nostrils flared with each breath, and his muscles tensed as if preparing for flight or fight. Most telling of all, Buccaneer kept shifting his position to stay between Finn and the approaching boats, his dark eyes fixed on Captain Steelheart with an intensity that bordered on recognition. "Easy, friend," Finn whispered, placing a calming hand on the donkey's neck, but beneath his palm he could feel the animal's heartbeat racing like a war drum. Captain Steelheart pulled himself aboard the Crimson Revenge with the fluid grace of a man who had boarded enemy vessels countless times before. His crew followed, forming a loose semicircle around the pirates, with weapons drawn but not yet threatening. Up close, Steelheart was even more imposing, easily 6.5 feet tall, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the ship and crew. "Captain Redbeard," Steelheart said with mock courtesy, his hand resting casually on his cutlass hilt. "How pleasant to encounter you again. I trust you've been enjoying the profits from our last meeting. State your business, Steelheart." Redbeard replied curtly. "We've done nothing to warrant this harassment." "Oh, but you have." Steelheart's smile was cold as winter seas. "You've been sailing in waters I consider my territory, taking prizes that rightfully belong to me. I'm here to collect what's owed, plus interest for the inconvenience." The standoff stretched taut as both crews eyed each other warily. Then Steelheart's gaze fell upon Buccaneer, and his expression shifted from mere greed to something approaching fascination. "Well now," he murmured, stepping closer to examine the donkey, despite Finn's protective stance. "What have we here? This is no ordinary beast." Steelheart's eyes lingered on the scars visible along Buccaneer's flanks, and Finn saw recognition flicker across the captain's scarred features. "These markings," Steelheart said slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I've seen their like before, in old texts and ancient carvings. You have something far more valuable aboard this ship than Spanish silver or stolen rum." Buccaneer's response was immediate and unmistakable. He bared his teeth and let out a sound that was less bray than battle cry, a primal challenge that seemed to echo from some distant heroic past. The tension snapped like an overstrained rope when Captain Steelheart reached toward Buccaneer's neck, clearly intending to examine the scarred hide more closely. The donkey's reaction was swift and decisive. He reared back on his hind legs and struck out with his front hooves, missing Steelheart's face by mere inches. "Seize that animal," Steelheart barked, his composure shattered by the near miss. "And kill anyone who interferes." The deck of the Crimson Revenge erupted into chaos as Steelheart's men drew their weapons and rushed forward. Captain Redbeard's crew, caught off guard by the sudden violence, scrambled for their own cutlasses and pistols. Steel rang against steel as the two groups clashed in the confined space of the ship's deck. Finn found himself separated from Buccaneer as 3 of Steelheart's men advanced on him with drawn swords. The young pirate had barely managed to pull his own blade when the nearest attacker lunged forward, his cutlass aimed at Finn's heart. The blow never landed. Buccaneer materialized between them with impossible speed, his powerful hindquarters rotating as he delivered a devastating kick to the attacker's chest. The man flew backward across the deck, his sword clattering away as he crashed into the ship's rail with a sickening thud. He did not rise again. The second attacker, a grizzled veteran with gold earrings and tattoos covering his arms, hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Buccaneer to demonstrate that the first strike had been no accident. The donkey pivoted with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, his hooves finding their target with surgical precision. The pirate's jaw shattered under the impact, and he collapsed to the deck, unconscious before he hit the planking. The third man, younger and perhaps more foolish than his companions, decided to try his luck with a cutlass thrust aimed at Buccaneer's flank. The donkey seemed to sense the attack before it began, sidestepping the blade with minimal effort while simultaneously lashing out with his rear hooves. The kick caught the attacker in the ribs, launching him completely over the ship's rail into the churning waters below. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds, but its impact on the battle was immediate and profound. Both crews stopped fighting to stare in amazement at the small donkey who had just dispatched 3 armed men with the efficiency of a seasoned warrior. "Impossible," breathed Captain Steelheart, his famous cutlass wavering in his grip as he struggled to process what he'd witnessed. Buccaneer stood calmly beside Finn, his breathing steady and controlled despite the violence he'd just unleashed. The donkey's dark eyes swept across the assembled pirates with cool assessment, as if calculating the threat level of each remaining opponent. "Your beast fights like no animal I've ever seen," Steelheart said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and greed. "Those weren't lucky strikes or panicked flailing. That was combat technique, pure and simple." Captain Redbeard, his own sword dripping with blood from a minor skirmish, stepped forward with newfound confidence. "Perhaps you'd care to reconsider your demands, Steelheart. It appears we have resources you hadn't anticipated." But Steelheart's eyes had taken on the fevered gleam of a man who'd glimpsed treasure beyond his wildest dreams. "Oh no, Redbeard. This changes everything. I no longer want your cargo or your ship." His gaze fixed on Buccaneer with predatory intensity. "I want that donkey. Name your price." "He's not for sale," Finn said firmly, surprised by the strength in his own voice. Steelheart's attention shifted to the young pirate, and his smile was cold as winter fog. "Everything has a price, boy. The question is whether you're wise enough to accept payment, or foolish enough to force me to take what I want." The standoff stretched taut once more, but now the dynamic had shifted. Where before Steelheart had held all the advantages, Buccaneer's display of combat prowess had introduced an element of uncertainty that neither side could ignore. "I'll give you one chance to reconsider," Steelheart continued, his hand tightening on his cutlass hilt. "Surrender the animal, and I'll allow your crew to keep their lives and their ship. Refuse, and I'll take the beast anyway after I've fed every last one of you to the shark." As if responding to the threat, Buccaneer stepped forward and issued another of those primal challenges, part bray, part roar, and entirely unlike any sound a domestic donkey should make. The golden doubloon that had somehow appeared in the unconscious pirate's pocket during the brief battle caught the sunlight, its surface bearing the image of Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare. Captain Steelheart noticed the coin at the same moment, his eyes widening as he recognized its significance. Ancient Greek gold, minted in Athens during the height of the classical period, was worth a fortune to collectors and scholars alike. But its presence here, now in the pocket of a man who had been kicked by what appeared to be an ordinary donkey, suggested connections to mysteries far older and more valuable than mere treasure. "Retreat to the boat," Steelheart commanded his remaining men, his strategic mind already working on new plans. "This isn't over, Redbeard. That animal belongs to history, and history has a way of claiming what's rightfully hers." The sun had barely set when Captain Redbeard summoned Finn to his private cabin. The young pirate found his captain hunched over the ship's log, his weathered hand moving carefully across the parchment as he recorded the day's extraordinary events. The cabin, normally a sanctuary of order and authority, felt charged with an energy that spoke of fundamental changes aboard the Crimson Revenge. "Sit down, lad," Redbeard said without looking up from his writing. "We need to discuss your remarkable companion." Finn settled into the chair across from the captain's desk, his eyes drawn to the open logbook, where precise script documented Buccaneer's combat performance. The captain's handwriting, usually confined to matters of wind direction and cargo, manifests now detailed fighting techniques and tactical assessments with the thoroughness of a military report. "The animal demonstrates combat awareness exceeding that of trained human fighters," Redbeard read aloud. "Strike placement suggests formal training in martial techniques unknown to modern warfare. Recommend immediate reassessment of creature's value to ship operations." The captain set down his quill and fixed Finn with a penetrating stare. "In 40 years at sea, I've witnessed storms that could sink islands and battles that turned the ocean red with blood, but I've never seen anything like what your donkey did today." "He was protecting me," Finn said simply, "and protecting the crew." "Aye, that he was, but the manner of that protection troubles me deeply." Redbeard leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "Those weren't lucky kicks or desperate flailing. That animal fought with the precision of a warrior who'd trained for years in the art of combat. Through the cabin windows, the Caribbean night stretched endlessly, dotted with stars that had guided sailors for countless generations. Somewhere out there, Captain Steelheart was planning his return, and both men knew the respite would be temporary. The crew's been talking, Redbeard continued. Half of them are ready to build a shrine to your buccaneer, while the other half are wondering if we've brought some supernatural curse aboard our ship. What do you think, Captain? Redbeard was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. I think that donkey of yours has secrets that run deeper than any of us imagined, and I think those secrets are going to bring us more trouble than we're prepared to handle. The captain rose and moved to a locked chest in the corner of his cabin. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound volume that Finn had never seen before, ancient and worn, its pages yellowed with age and careful use. This belonged to my grandfather, who sailed with Henry Morgan himself. It contains accounts of creatures and phenomena that most men would dismiss as sailors' tales and rum-fueled fantasies. He opened the book to a marked page and turned it toward Finn. But after today, I'm inclined to believe every word. The page showed a detailed illustration of donkeys in battle formation, their riders wearing armor that glinted like bronze in the artist's rendering. The text, written in archaic script, described animals bred specifically for warfare by ancient Greek city-states. These noble beasts possessed intelligence rivaling that of men, Redbeard read, and loyalty unto death for those they deemed worthy companions. In battle they were worth 10 ordinary soldiers, for they could think as well as fight, and their courage never wavered in the face of overwhelming odds. Finn studied the illustration, noting similarities to Buccaneer's build and bearing. You think he's descended from these war donkeys? I think your friend is one of these war donkeys, Redbeard said gravely. How he survived into our modern age, I cannot fathom. But the evidence suggests we're dealing with something far more significant than a shipwrecked farm animal. A knock at the cabin door interrupted their conversation. Tommy Hayes entered at the captain's command, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued by the day's events. Begging your pardon, Captain, but the lads wanted me to speak for them. About the donkey, I mean. Go on, Redbeard encouraged. Well, sir, we've been discussing what happened today, and we wanted you to know that we no longer consider Buccaneer a burden to the ship. In fact, we'd be honored to serve alongside such a noble beast. Tommy's voice gained strength as he continued. Blackjack Pete says he's never seen fighting skill like that, and Rotgut Sam wants to know if Buccaneer might teach him a few techniques. Redbeard's gruff exterior couldn't quite hide his amusement at this request. And what does the crew propose we do about Captain Steelheart's obvious interest in our four-legged shipmate? We fight, sir. We protect Buccaneer the same way he protected us today. He's one of the crew now, and we don't abandon our own. After Tommy left, Redbeard returned to his logbook, adding a final entry to the day's record. Crew morale at highest level in recent memory. Animal has proven his worth beyond question. Recommend elevation to full crew member status, with all accompanying privileges and protection. Well, Finn, the captain said, closing the log with finality. It seems your donkey has accomplished something I never thought possible. He's united this crew of cutthroats and scoundrels behind a common cause. The discovery came 3 days later when Rotgut Sam was cleaning out a storage compartment beneath the ship's galley. His excited shouts brought the entire crew, running as he emerged from the cramped space clutching a rolled parchment that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Captain Redbeard, Sam called, his voice cracking with excitement. You need to see this. It was hidden behind a false panel, wrapped in oiled leather like someone meant for it to survive the ages. The crew gathered on the main deck as Captain Redbeard carefully unrolled the ancient document. The parchment was unlike anything they'd seen before. Not the rough paper of modern charts, but something that felt almost alive beneath their fingers, covered in symbols and markings that seemed to shift and dance in the Caribbean sunlight. It's Greek, breathed Blackjack Pete, who'd sailed the Mediterranean in his younger days. Ancient Greek, from the look of these letters. But I can't ta'en heads nor tails of most of it. The map showed a series of islands scattered across what appeared to be the Aegean Sea, with detailed coastlines and landmarks rendered in exquisite detail. But what captured everyone's attention were the warnings inscribed around the borders in multiple languages: Greek, Latin, and what looked like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Here, Finn pointed to a section near the map's center. I can make out some of these words: sacred treasures of the gods, and something about guardians of the ancient compact. Captain Redbeard traced the route marked on the parchment with one gnarled finger. The path led from the Greek mainland to a small island marked with symbols that seemed to writhe and move when viewed directly. At the island's center was drawn a temple, and surrounding it were images that made even the hardened pirates uneasy: creatures with the bodies of men and heads of beasts, serpents with wings, and other things that belonged to nightmares rather than earthly cartography. "Look at this," Tommy Hayes said, pointing to a section of text along the map's eastern edge. "It's a warning about the treasure's guardians. Says they're not mortal creatures, but something older and more dangerous." But it was Buccaneer's reaction to the map that truly unsettled them all. The donkey, who had been grazing peacefully nearby, suddenly approached the gathered pirates with purposeful steps. His dark eyes fixed on the parchment with an intensity that bordered on recognition, and he began to make soft, whickering sounds that seemed almost like speech. "He knows this place," Finn said with growing certainty. "Look at how he's studying those symbols. It's like he's reading them." Indeed, Buccaneer's gaze moved systematically across the map, pausing at specific landmarks and markings with the attention of someone confirming familiar details. When his eyes reached the central temple, he let out a sound that was part challenge, part longing, and entirely unlike anything a domestic animal should produce. "The treasure must be connected to his origins," Captain Redbeard mused. "Perhaps this map leads to the place where creatures like him were bred and trained for war." The implications were staggering. If Buccaneer truly was descended from ancient Greek war donkeys, and if this map led to their homeland, the treasure they might find could be beyond imagination. Not merely gold and silver, but artifacts of power from the classical world. Items that scholars and collectors would pay fortunes to possess. "There's more text here," Finn said, kneeling beside the map to examine the smaller inscriptions. "It mentions something called the Trial of Heroes, and warns that only those found worthy can claim the sacred treasures." "Worthy how?" asked Iron Tooth Morrison, his practical mind already calculating the dangers they might face. "It doesn't say specifically, but there are references to tests of courage, wisdom, and loyalty, and something about the blood of ancient warriors being required to unlock the temple's secrets." Buccaneer moved closer to Finn, pressing his muzzle against the young pirate's shoulder in what seemed like encouragement. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly communicative, that even the most skeptical crew members had to acknowledge they were dealing with intelligence that transcended animal instinct. "The blood of ancient warriors," Captain Redbeard repeated thoughtfully. "What if that doesn't mean human blood at all? What if it refers to creatures like our friend here?" As if responding to the captain's speculation, Buccaneer approached the map once more and touched his muzzle to a specific symbol near the temple. The symbol, a stylized horsehead surrounded by geometric patterns, began to glow with soft golden light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the donkey's heartbeat. "Well, lads," Captain Redbeard announced, his decision made. "It appears we have our heading. Set course for the Mediterranean. We're going treasure hunting in the cradle of civilization itself." The crew erupted in cheers, their excitement infectious despite the obvious dangers that lay ahead. But as they began preparations for the long voyage, none of them noticed the shadow that passed overhead. Captain Steelheart's ship, following at a distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The island rose from the Aegean Sea like a forgotten dream made manifest, its rocky shores crowned with the remains of marble columns that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. After 3 weeks of hard sailing across the Atlantic and through the Mediterranean, the crew of the Crimson Revenge gazed upon their destination with a mixture of awe and apprehension. There, Captain Redbeard pointed toward a natural harbor carved into the island's eastern shore. "We'll anchor there and explore on foot." The map shows the temple complex is inland, hidden among those hills. As they drew closer, the true scope of the ancient ruins became apparent. What had once been a thriving settlement now lay in picturesque decay, with marble structures partially reclaimed by olive trees and wild herbs that filled the air with their Mediterranean fragrance. Broken statues of gods and heroes lined what had once been a grand processional way, their faces worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Buccaneer had grown increasingly agitated during their approach to the island, pacing the deck with nervous energy and issuing occasional calls that seemed to echo across the water. Now, as they dropped anchor in the crystal-clear harbor, the donkey stood at the ship's rail with an intensity that suggested he was seeing not ruins, but the living glory of what this place had once been. "Look at him," Finn murmured to Tommy Hayes as they prepared the landing boats. "It's like he remembers this place." The landing party consisted of Captain Redbeard, Finn, Tommy, Blackjack Pete, and naturally Buccaneer, who had made it clear through his behavior that he would not be left behind. They rowed to shore in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts about what they might discover among the ancient stones. The beach was littered with fragments of pottery and carved marble that spoke of a civilization far more sophisticated than anything they'd encountered in the Caribbean. Finn picked up a piece of ceramic decorated with images of warriors riding into battle alongside powerful donkeys, their faces stern with noble purpose. This way, Buccaneer seemed to communicate through his purposeful movement inland, leading them along a path that was barely visible beneath decades of overgrowth. The donkey navigated the terrain with the confidence of someone following a familiar route, pausing occasionally to ensure the humans could keep pace. They climbed through groves of ancient olive trees, their gnarled trunks twisted by age into forms that seemed almost alive. Wildflowers carpeted the hillsides in brilliant colors, red poppies, yellow broom, and purple lavender that released their perfume with each footstep. "There," Tommy breathed, pointing ahead to where the path crested a low ridge. "Mother of God, would you look at that?" The temple complex spread before them like a vision from the classical world. Though partially ruined, enough remained intact to suggest the grandeur that had once stood here. Marble columns still supported sections of an elaborately carved roof, and broad steps led up to what had once been the main sanctuary. But it was the stone tablet that dominated the site's central courtyard that drew their immediate attention. Standing 12 feet tall and carved from a single block of black marble, it was covered with inscriptions in ancient Greek and accompanied by detailed reliefs showing the genealogies of legendary creatures. Buccaneer approached the tablet with something approaching reverence, his usual alertness replaced by a solemnity that seemed almost religious. As he drew closer, the golden threading in the bridle fragment still tangled in his mane began to glow with soft light, responding to some unseen energy emanating from the carved stone. "Can anyone read this?" Captain Redbeard asked, though he suspected the answer before the words left his mouth. Finn had been studying the inscriptions during their voyage, using every text in the ship's small library to prepare for this moment. "Some of it," he said hesitantly. "This section talks about the noble companions of heroes and their sacred duty to protect the innocent." He moved along the tablet's surface, tracing lines of text with his finger. "Here it mentions breeding programs designed to create perfect unity between human warrior and animal guardian. And this part talks about bloodlines that could be traced back to the gods themselves." Buccaneer had positioned himself directly in front of a specific section of the relief carving that showed a magnificent donkey standing beside a warrior in bronze armor. The resemblance between the carved animal and their living companion was unmistakable. The same intelligent eyes, the same proud bearing, even the same pattern of scars along the flanks. "Look at the names," Blackjack Pete said, pointing to the inscriptions beneath each carved figure. "These aren't just any warriors and their mounts. These are the legendary heroes of ancient Greece." Indeed, the tablet listed names that even uneducated pirates recognized from tavern tales and traveling storytellers: Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, and dozens of others whose exploits had become the stuff of legend, and beside each human name was inscribed the name of their donkey companion. Honored equally in the stone record, Buccaneer isn't just descended from war donkeys, Finn realized with growing amazement. He's descended from the personal mounts of the greatest heroes in history. The ground began to tremble as they approached the temple's inner sanctum, and the air grew thick with an energy that made the hair on their arms stand upright. Captain Redbeard held up his hand, signaling the party to halt as a low rumble echoed from the depths of the ancient structures. "Something's coming," Tommy whispered, his hand moving instinctively to his cutlass. "Something big." The trembling intensified, and dust began to fall from the temple's carved ceiling as heavy footsteps approached from the shadows beyond the altar. What emerged from the darkness was a creature that belonged to nightmares rather than the waking world, standing 8 feet tall, with the body of a man but covered in coarse bronze hair, and the head of a bull whose eyes burned with supernatural fire. The Minotaur's horns, each as long as a man's arm, and sharp as spear points, caught the filtered sunlight streaming through gaps in the temple roof. Its massive chest rose and fell with breathing that sounded like distant thunder, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of centuries. "Who dares disturb the sacred treasury?" The creature demanded, its words echoing in ancient Greek that somehow all of them could understand. "Who comes seeking the treasures of the gods without proving their worth?" The pirates stood frozen, their weapons useless in the face of such a supernatural guardian. Even Captain Redbeard, who had faced storms and battles that would break lesser men, found himself speechless before this creature of myth and legend. But Buccaneer showed no fear. The donkey stepped forward with calm dignity, positioning himself between the Minotaur and his human companions. When he spoke, and there was no doubt that what emerged from his throat was speech rather than animal sounds, his voice carried the authority of ancient nobility. "I am Buccaneer, son of Arion, grandson of Pegasus himself. I claim the right of trial by combat for my chosen companion and his loyal crew." The Minotaur's burning eyes fixed on the small donkey, and for a moment, something like respect flickered in their depths. "You bear the bloodline of heroes, noble one, but your human companions are nothing more than common pirates. Why should creatures of legend concern themselves with such lowly mortals?" "Because," Buccaneer replied, his voice growing stronger, "they have shown kindness where others showed cruelty, loyalty where others showed betrayal, and courage where others showed cowardice. My companion Finn rescued me from certain death, not for gain but from compassion. His captain gave me sanctuary when he could have cast me overboard. His crewmates defended me when enemies sought to steal me away." The Minotaur snorted, a sound like steam escaping from heated metal. "Pretty words, Donkey Prince, but actions speak louder than speech. If you would claim the treasures of this place, you must prove your worth in combat against me. Defeat me, and the sacred artifacts are yours. Fall before my strength, and you and your pirates will join the bones of countless others who thought themselves worthy of divine treasure." Without hesitation, Buccaneer accepted the challenge. "I accept, but know this, Guardian. I fight not for treasure, but to protect those who have shown themselves worthy of protection." The battle that followed was unlike anything the pirates had ever witnessed. The Minotaur charged with the force of an avalanche, its massive hooves striking sparks from the marble floor. But Buccaneer met the charge with tactical brilliance that spoke of training by masters of warfare. Where the Minotaur relied on brute strength, Buccaneer employed speed and intelligence. He ducked beneath the creature's grasping hands, struck at vulnerable points with surgical precision, and used the Minotaur's own momentum against it. When the Guardian swung its massive fists, Buccaneer was already elsewhere, appearing behind or beside his opponent to deliver devastating kicks that sent the creature staggering. The fight raged across the temple's interior, destroying ancient columns and shattering ceremonial vessels. But gradually it became clear that Buccaneer's superior tactics were prevailing over the Minotaur's raw power. The Guardian's breathing grew labored, its movements slower and less coordinated. The end came when Buccaneer executed a maneuver that seemed impossible, leaping completely over the Minotaur's lowered head to land behind the creature, then delivering a perfectly placed kick to the base of its skull. The Guardian collapsed with a crash that shook the entire temple, its massive form crumbling into dust that sparkled with golden light. From that dust emerged a single object, a horn carved from what appeared to be polished ivory, inscribed with symbols that pulsed with inner fire. As Finn approached to examine it, the horn grew warm in his hands, and suddenly he could understand the meaning of the ancient Greek inscriptions that covered the temple walls. "The horn of the Minotaur," he read aloud from newly comprehensible text, carved above the altar, proof of victory over the guardian of sacred treasures. "Bearer of this horn is granted access to the divine armory and all its contents." Buccaneer approached Finn and gently nuzzled the horn, his eyes meeting the young pirate's with unmistakable pride. Together they had passed the first test, but both somehow knew that greater challenges lay ahead in the depths of the temple complex. The Minotaur's horn grew warm in Finn's hands as they descended stone steps that seemed to spiral endlessly into the heart of the island. Ancient torches flickered to life at their approach, illuminating walls covered in murals that depicted the great heroes of legend alongside their faithful donkey companion. The air grew thick with the scent of myrrh and something else, something that spoke of divine presence and power beyond mortal understanding. "Look at this," Captain Redbeard breathed, pausing before a massive bronze door sealed with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the torchlight. "The craftsmanship is beyond anything I've seen in 40 years at sea." The door bore the image of Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, her owl perched on one shoulder while her other hand extended toward a magnificent donkey whose eyes held the spark of divine intelligence. Beneath the relief were inscribed words in ancient Greek that Finn could now read, thanks to the horn's magical influence. "Here lie the sacred treasures of the gods, guarded by divine will and ancient compact. Let only the worthy approach, for the unworthy shall find naught but their own destruction." But it was Buccaneer's reaction to the chamber beyond that truly amazed them. As the bronze doors swung open at the horn's touch, revealing a treasure room that stretched beyond the reach of torchlight, the donkey moved with the reverence of a pilgrim approaching a holy shrine. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to pulse with their own life. Golden artifacts lined shelves carved from living rock, their surfaces gleaming with the patina of ages. Weapons forged by divine smiths rested in places of honor, their blades still sharp after millennia, their hilts wrapped in materials that had never known tarnish or decay. But Buccaneer ignored the gold and jewels, the weapons and armor that would have made any pirate's fortune. Instead, he moved with unerring purpose toward a simple wooden stand that held a single artifact, a bridle woven from what appeared to be spun sunlight, its golden strands shimmering with their own inner radiance. "Athena's golden bridle," Finn read from an inscription beside the stand. "Forged by Hephaestus himself for the greatest of the divine war mounts, grants the wearer wisdom beyond mortal ken and strength to match their noble heart." The bridle was beautiful beyond description, its golden threads woven in patterns that seemed to tell the story of every great battle ever fought. Where normal leather might show wear from age and use, this divine artifact pulsed with the vitality of eternal youth. The bit was crafted from what looked like crystallized starlight, and the buckles bore engravings of scenes from the Trojan War. "It's calling to him," Tommy observed, as Buccaneer approached the bridle with something approaching worship. "Look how it responds to his presence." Indeed, as the donkey drew closer, the bridle began to glow more brightly, its golden threads seeming to reach toward their destined wearer. When Buccaneer finally came close enough to touch it, the artifact leaped from its stand to settle around his head with perfect fit, as if it had been waiting centuries for this moment. The transformation was immediate and breathtaking. The golden bridle enhanced everything that made Buccaneer extraordinary. His already impressive intelligence sharpened to clarity that rivaled the wisest scholars, his strength multiplied tenfold, and his bearing took on a majesty that marked him unmistakably as nobility among his kind. But more than physical enhancement, the bridle granted him something far more precious: the ability to communicate directly with human minds through thought, rather than speech. His voice, when it reached them, carried the warmth of deep affection mixed with ancient wisdom. My friends, Buccaneer's thoughts touched each of them gently. I can finally tell you what I have longed to say since Finn first pulled me from the wreckage. You saved not just an animal that day, but the last heir of a bloodline that stretches back to the gods themselves. Captain Redbeard staggered backward, his weathered face pale with shock. You're speaking directly into our minds. The bridle allows many things that were impossible before, Buccaneer explained, his mental voice filled with gentle humor. But most importantly, it allows me to share the truth of what we face. Captain Steelheart's interest in me is not mere greed. He serves powers that seek to claim the divine artifacts for purposes that would bring great suffering to your world. Though the pirates, Blackjack Pete, Tommy and the rest, stood in stunned silence as they absorbed this revelation. Their donkey, their ship's mascot, who had been the subject of so much good-natured mockery, was revealed as something far greater than any of them had imagined. You mean those stories about war donkeys and ancient heroes? Finn said slowly. They were all true, more true than you can imagine, Buccaneer confirmed. And now, wearing Athena's bridle, I can fulfill my true purpose, to stand beside worthy humans as a guardian against the darkness that always seeks to claim the light. As if responding to his words, the other artifacts in the chamber began to glow softly, recognizing the presence of their rightful protector. But somewhere in the distance they could hear the sound of approaching ships, and all knew their time of discovery was about to be cut short. The thunder of cannon fire echoed across the island's harbor as Captain Steelheart's fleet emerged from the morning mist like harbingers of doom. From their position in the temple complex, the crew of the Crimson Revenge could see 3 ships bearing down on their anchored vessel, the Serpent's Tooth, leading 2 smaller frigates in a coordinated attack formation. Nod. He's been following us, Captain Redbeard growled, his spyglass trained on the approaching enemy, waiting for us to find the treasure before making his move. But it was the weapon in Steelheart's hands that sent a chill through even Buccaneer's enhanced courage. The rival captain stood at his ship's prow, wielding a sword unlike anything they'd seen before, a curved blade that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, its edge crackling with supernatural energy that spoke of dark magic and ancient curses. The Kraken's tooth sword. Buccaneer's voice reached them through their mental link, heavy with recognition and dread. Forged from the fang of the last great sea monster, quenched in the blood of Poseidon's own horses, it was created specifically to kill creatures of divine heritage. Through the temple's ancient columns, they watched as Steelheart's landing boats struck the beach with military precision. The rival captain had clearly prepared for this confrontation, bringing not just pirates but specialists, men who moved with the disciplined coordination of soldiers, equipped with weapons that gleamed with otherworldly menace. Surrender the donkey and the divine artifacts, Steelheart's voice carried across the ruins, amplified by some supernatural means. I offer you one chance to live, Redbeard. Hand over what rightfully belongs to those with the power to use it properly. Like hell we will, muttered Blackjack Pete, checking his pistol's charge. But Buccaneer had grown still, his magnificent head raised as he listened to sounds beyond human hearing. Through their mental connection, his companions could sense his growing alarm. He's not alone, the donkey warned. Steelheart has allied himself with creatures of the deep sea, beings that serve the old gods who were cast down in the ancient wars. They hunger for revenge against Athena's children. Indeed, as they watched, shapes began emerging from the water behind Steelheart's boats, not quite human, not quite fish, but something twisted and terrible that belonged to the ocean's darkest depths. These creatures moved with predatory grace, their scaled skin glistening with seawater and malice. How many men does he have? Tommy asked, trying to count the approaching forces. Too many, Captain Redbeard replied grimly. And those aren't all men. Some of those things shouldn't exist in our world. Steelheart himself had begun the climb toward the temple, his cursed sword held ready for battle. As he drew closer, they could see that the blade had changed him. His eyes now glowed with the same dark energy that coursed along the weapon's edge, and his movements carried an inhuman fluidity that spoke of powers beyond mortal care. The sword consumes its wielder even as it grants them strength, Buccaneer explained, his mental voice tight with worry. Steelheart has sacrificed his humanity for the power to destroy me, but the cost will be his soul, and eventually his life. The confrontation seemed inevitable, but Buccaneer surprised them all by stepping forward to address their enemies directly. His voice, enhanced by Athena's bridle, carried across the ruins with divine authority. Captain Steelheart, I know what drives you and I pity the choice you've made. Release your human crew from this madness, and I will face you alone. Let this be settled between the cursed and the blessed, without spilling innocent blood. Steelheart's laughter was like the sound of waves crashing against jagged rocks. Noble words from Athena's pet. But I've come too far and sacrificed too much to be swayed by appeals to mercy. Your divine heritage ends today, beast, and your pirate friends will watch you die before they join you in death. The rival captain raised his cursed sword, and its dark energy began to spread outward like a poisonous cloud. Where the shadow touched the ancient stones, they cracked and crumbled, centuries of divine blessing undone in moments. He means to destroy the entire temple, Finn realized with horror. If he can't have the treasures, he'll make sure no one else can either. Not just the temple, Buccaneer corrected, his thoughts grim with understanding. The sword's curse will spread across the entire island, turning it into a wasteland where nothing can grow or live. Steelheart has become a servant of entropy itself. As if summoned by their fear, more of the sea creatures emerged from the harbor waters, surrounding the island with a ring of supernatural menace. The battle ahead would determine not just their own fates, but whether the ancient sanctuary would survive to inspire future generations with its testament to the bond between heroes and their noble companion. Well, lads, Captain Redbeard said with grim determination, we've faced storms and battles before. This is just another kind of weather, and we'll sail through it the same way we always have together. The battle erupted with the fury of ancient grudges as Steelheart's forces stormed the temple complex. But as the rival captain raised his cursed sword to strike the first blow against the sacred stones, Buccaneer displayed powers that transcended even their wildest expectations. The donkey's eyes blazed with golden fire as he approached a conch shell that had been half hidden among the temple's artifacts, a massive spiral of pearl and coral that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of distant tides. As soon as Buccaneer's muzzle touched its surface, the ancient weapon responded to his divine heritage. The storm collar's conch, Buccaneer's mental voice reached his companions with new authority. Neptune's own instrument, used by the sea gods to command wind and wave. Stand back, my friends. The ocean herself comes to our aid. What followed challenged everything the pirates thought they knew about the natural world. As Buccaneer breathed into the conch shell, its haunting note carried across the Aegean Sea with supernatural power, calling forth energies that had slumbered since the Age of Heroes. The sky, which had been clear and blue moments before, suddenly darkened with clouds that formed from nothing, spiraling into towering thunderheads that crackled with barely contained lightning. The calm sea around the island began to churn and boil, waves rising to heights that defied reason as the ancient instrument summoned the storm spirits to battle. Impossible, Steelheart snarled, his cursed sword wavering as he struggled to maintain his footing on ground that now shook with supernatural force. No land creature commands the sea, but Buccaneer was no ordinary land creature. Enhanced by Athena's golden bridle and wielding Neptune's own conch, he had become a force of nature unto himself. The first lightning bolt struck precisely where he directed it, not at Steelheart himself, but at the largest of the sea creatures that had emerged to serve the rival captain. The creature, which had resembled a twisted hybrid of octopus and man, simply disintegrated under the divine lightning's touch, its unnatural form unable to withstand the purifying force of the storm god's wrath. The other sea monsters retreated hastily into deeper waters, their predatory confidence shattered by this display of power that exceeded their own dark magic. The second ship, Tommy shouted over the rising wind, pointing towards Steelheart's smaller frigate as it struggled against waves that had grown mountainous in the space of minutes. Buccaneer's response was swift and terrible. Another note from the Stormcaller's conch brought down a bolt of lightning so precise it struck the ship's powder magazine. The frigate exploded in a pillar of fire and smoke, its crew's screams lost in the thunder that rolled across the churning sea. The third vessel, seeing the fate of its companion, attempted to flee toward the open ocean, but the storm followed Buccaneer's will, and a waterspout formed in its path. A twisting column of wind and water that lifted the fleeing ship like a child's toy before dashing it against the rocky cliffs of a neighboring island. Sorcery, Steelheart gasped, his own supernatural allies reduced to cowering shadows. This is impossible. Divine artifacts don't grant such power to mere beasts. I am no mere beast, Buccaneer replied, his mental voice carrying the weight of divine authority. I am the last heir of bloodlines that stretch back to the gods themselves, wearing the bridle of Athena and wielding the conch of Neptune. You brought cursed magic to a place of divine blessing, Steelheart. Did you think the old powers would not respond? The battle had turned decisively, but Steelheart himself remained dangerous. The Kraken's tooth sword pulsed with dark energy that seemed to feed on the chaos around them, growing stronger as destruction spread across the battlefield. Where its shadow fell, the ancient stones cracked and withered, divine blessings corrupted by the weapon's malevolent influence. If I cannot have the treasures, Steelheart declared, raising his cursed blade toward the temple's heart, then let them be destroyed. Let this place become a wasteland, and let its secrets die with us all. But as he prepared to strike at the temple's foundation stones, something unexpected happened. The surviving members of his own crew, pirates who had followed him for gold rather than conviction, began to retreat from their captains increasingly in human form. The sword's corruption was spreading through Steelheart's body, turning his flesh gray and lifeless, his eyes blazing with unnatural fire that spoke of a soul already half consumed. "Captain," one of his men called out desperately, "this isn't what we signed on for. You're becoming something that ain't human anymore." But Steelheart was beyond hearing mere mortal voices. The Kraken's tooth sword had claimed him completely, and now only the weapon's hunger for destruction remained. Wearing the shell of what had once been a man, the storm continued to rage around them, controlled by Buccaneer's will and the power of the ancient conch. But all present understood that the final confrontation was yet to come. The cursed sword against the divine donkey, darkness against light, destruction against protection, hatred against the bonds of loyalty that had brought them so far together. The aftermath of the supernatural battle found the crew of the Crimson Revenge forever changed, not just by what they had witnessed, but by how they now saw themselves and their place in the world. As the storm summoned by Buccaneer's conch gradually subsided, leaving the Aegean Sea calm and crystalline once more, the pirates gathered in the temple's courtyard with expressions of awe and newfound purpose. Captain Redbeard was the first to speak, his weathered voice carrying a gravity that none of them had heard before. "Lads, I've sailed these seas for 40 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the ocean could offer. But today we've witnessed something that changes everything we thought we knew about our place in this world." The captain reached into his leather pouch and withdrew small medallions that he had been crafting during their voyage across the Mediterranean. Each was carved from driftwood and inlaid with gold salvaged from their various prizes, but now they seemed to carry weight beyond their material value. "These Brotherhood medallions represent more than just our crew," Redbeard continued, placing the first medallion around Finn's neck with ceremonial dignity. "They mark us as witnesses to divine power and guardians of something far greater than mere treasure." Blackjack Pete, his usual jocularity replaced by profound respect, stepped forward to receive his medallion. "Captain, I spent most of my life thinking that strength meant who could swing a cutlass fastest or who could drink the most rum. But watching Buccaneer fight today, seeing the nobility in everything he does, I understand now that true strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves." Tommy Hayes nodded agreement, as he accepted his medallion. My whole life, I've been searching for something worth believing in, something bigger than just survival and profit. Today, I found it. He turned toward Buccaneer, who stood quietly nearby, his golden bridle catching the afternoon sunlight. We're not just pirates anymore, are we? We're something new. Iron Tooth Morrison, gruff and practical to his core, surprised everyone with the emotion in his voice. I misjudged you, lad, he said to Finn. When you pulled that donkey from the wreckage, I thought you were soft. But you saw something in him that the rest of us missed. You saw worth where we saw burden, nobility where we saw nuisance. Rotgut Sam, tears streaming down his scarred cheeks, added his own confession. I've done terrible things in my life, hurt people who didn't deserve it, taken things that weren't mine to take. But standing here now after watching Buccaneer fight to protect us all, I want to be better. I want to be worthy of sailing alongside such a noble creature. Pegleg Thompson tapped his wooden leg against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the sacred space. This temple, this island, it's not just about ancient history, is it? It's about the future, about what kind of men we choose to be going forward. As each crew member received their medallion, they shared their own transformation. Stories of lives spent in pursuit of selfish gain, gradually giving way to understanding that their greatest treasure had been among them all along, the bond between a young pirate who showed compassion and the divine creature who responded with unwavering loyalty. The medallions are more than symbols, Captain Redbeard explained, as the ceremony continued. They're promises to protect the innocent, to stand against those who would use power for selfish ends, to honor the bond between human and divine that Finn and Buccaneer have shown us. Finn felt the weight of his medallion against his chest, warm with significance beyond its material composition. I never imagined when I pulled Buccaneer from that wreckage that we were beginning something so important. I just couldn't bear to watch him suffer. And that compassion, Buccaneer's mental voice reached them all, is exactly what makes you worthy partners in the work ahead. The old powers are stirring again, both light and dark. The ancient compacts between gods and mortals are being tested. You have proven yourselves guardians of the light. The crew had formed a circle now, their medallions glinting in the late afternoon sun, their faces reflecting a unity that went far deeper than mere shared adventure. They had begun this journey as pirates, seeking treasure, but they would leave it as something unprecedented, a brotherhood dedicated to protecting the bonds between the mortal and divine worlds. So what happens now? Cutlass Jim asked, his voice filled with anticipation rather than uncertainty. Where do we sail next? Captain Redbeard smiled, and for the first time in months it was a smile unclouded by cynicism or greed. Now, lads, we become the stuff of legends ourselves. The world is full of bullies like Steelheart, people who would abuse power for their own end. But it's also full of folks like young Finn here, people with good hearts who need protection. As the sun set over the ancient temple, painting the marble columns in shades of gold and rose, the transformed crew of the Crimson Revenge prepared to sail toward whatever adventures awaited them, no longer as mere pirates, but as guardians of something sacred and eternal. 3 days had passed since their victory at the temple, when the lookout's cry shattered the peaceful morning aboard the Crimson Revenge. Ships on the horizon, multiple vessels, flying no colors. But Buccaneer had sensed the approaching danger long before human eyes could spot it. The divine donkey stood at the ship's prow, his golden bridle gleaming in the morning sun, his enhanced senses detecting threats that lay beyond mortal perception. In his hooves, he held a mirror, unlike any earthly artifact. Its surface seemed to contain swirling depths that showed not reflections, but visions of truth and future possibilities. The siren's mirror, Buccaneer's mental voice, carried undertones of ancient dread. Stolen from the temple of the sea witches, it reveals the true intentions of all who gaze upon it. And what I see in its depths brings grave tidings indeed. Captain Redbeard joined him at the rail, his spyglass trained on the approaching fleet. What he saw made his weathered face pale with recognition and fear. That's not just Steelheart's rebuilt fleet. Those other ships, I know those designs. Sea witches, kelpies, and worse. He's made alliance with every dark power of the ocean depths. The mirror in Buccaneer's hooves swirled with images that made even the bravest pirates step back in alarm. They saw Steelheart, no longer entirely human, his form twisted by the continued influence of the Kraken's tooth sword. But worse than his physical corruption was what the mirror revealed of his plans, a campaign of destruction that would target every port, every island, every vessel that might offer sanctuary to those he deemed his enemies. He means to turn the entire Mediterranean into his hunting ground, Finn observed, his voice tight with worry as he watched the visions unfold. Look there. He's already attacked merchant vessels, enslaved their crews, forced them to serve his dark purposes. The mirror showed scenes of devastation that spoke of madness and unlimited malice. Coastal villages burned while their inhabitants fled inland. Trading ships found broken and empty, their crews missing and their holds stripped bare. Pirates who had once sailed as free men now served as hollow-eyed slaves, their will broken by dark enchantments that bound them to Steelheart's increasingly inhuman purposes. But there's more, Buccaneer warned, his mental voice heavy with concern. The mirror shows his true target. He seeks to corrupt every divine artifact in the ancient world, to turn the treasures of the gods into weapons of destruction. If he succeeds, the balance between light and darkness will be shattered forever. Tommy Hayes, studying the approaching fleet through his own telescope, counted at least a dozen vessels of various sizes and origins. Captain, they outnumber us badly, and if half the stories about sea witches are true, we're not just facing superior numbers, but supernatural powers we can barely comprehend. Aye, Captain Redbeard agreed grimly. But we have advantages they don't expect: Buccaneer's divine heritage, the artifacts we claimed from the temple, and something else: we fight for protection while they fight for conquest. That difference has decided many a battle throughout history. The Siren's mirror continued to reveal disturbing truths about their approaching enemies. Steelheart had indeed allied himself with beings that should have remained in the deepest ocean trenches, creatures of spite and malice that fed on suffering and delighted in corruption. His human crew, what remained of them, moved with the jerky motions of marionettes, their souls bound to his will by enchantments that grew stronger with each act of cruelty they were forced to commit. The most troubling vision Buccaneer shared through their mental link shows what will happen if we fail here. Steelheart's corruption will spread like a plague across the Mediterranean, then to the Atlantic, then to every ocean of the world. The age of heroes will end, and in its place will come an age of darkness, where the strong prey upon the weak without consequence. Blackjack Pete, his hand resting on the medallion that marked him as one of their brotherhood, spoke with quiet determination. Then we don't fail. Simple as that. We've seen what nobility looks like, what it means to fight for something greater than ourselves. I'd rather die protecting that than live in the world Steelheart wants to create. The crew murmured agreement, their transformation from selfish pirates to noble guardians complete in the face of absolute evil. Each man checked his weapons and prepared for battle, but all understood that the outcome would depend not on conventional warfare, but on the clash between divine blessing and infernal corruption. One thing puzzles me, Finn said, still studying the images in the Siren's mirror. If Steelheart has allied with such powerful dark forces, why hasn't he simply attacked us directly? Why this elaborate chase across the Mediterranean? Buccaneer's answer chilled them all. Because the mirror shows one more truth. He's not just hunting us. He's driving us toward a specific place, a convergence point where the barriers between the mortal and divine worlds grow thin. There, with the right rituals and enough spilled blood, he plans to tear open a gateway that will allow his dark patrons to enter our world permanently. The convergence point revealed itself at dawn as a phenomenon that defied every law of nature the pirates had ever known. The sea itself seemed to bend upward in a great spiral, creating a watery amphitheater where normal physics held no sway. Ships could sail on its curved walls as easily as on level water, while in the center, a maelstrom of impossible colors marked the place where reality grew thin enough for ancient powers to pierce through. Steelheart's fleet had already begun the ritual, their vessels arranged in a precise pattern that spoke of careful preparation and dark knowledge. At the formation's heart, the corrupted captain stood on his flagship's deck, no longer recognizably human. The Kraken's tooth sword had completed its terrible work. Steelheart's flesh had taken on the grey-green pallor of deep-sea creatures. His eyes blazed with bioluminescent fire, and tentacle-like appendages writhed where his arms had once been. The gateway grows stronger with each passing moment, Buccaneer observed, his enhanced senses reading energies that human perception could not grasp. But to complete the ritual, he needs a sacrifice of divine blood. That is why he has pursued us so relentlessly. I am the key to his dark purpose. As the Crimson Revenge entered the supernatural amphitheater, Buccaneer moved to the ship's center and knelt beside an artifact that none of them had noticed before. A trident that seemed to be carved from a single piece of crystallized ocean. Where other divine weapons blazed with golden light, this one pulsed with the deep blue-green of profound depths, its 3 tines crackling with the power to command the very foundations of the sea. Poseidon's trident, Buccaneer announced, his mental voice filled with reverence and determination. The sea god's own weapon, hidden aboard our ship since we left the temple. It has been waiting for this moment when the choice between salvation and damnation would be decided on the waters that have always been its domain. The trident responded to Buccaneer's divine heritage, rising from the deck to hover before him as its power awakened fully. Where the storm collar's conch had allowed him to command weather, this weapon granted dominion over the sea itself in all its aspects, the crushing pressure of the deepest trenches, the inexorable power of the tides, and the cleansing force that had shaped the world since time began. My friends, Buccaneer's thoughts reached each of them with the weight of final farewells. What must be done here may require a sacrifice greater than any of us anticipated. The trident offers power enough to seal the gateway and banish Steelheart's dark allies back to the depths where they belong. But wielding such force may cost me everything. Captain Redbeard stepped forward, his weathered face set with fierce loyalty. Then we'll make sure your sacrifice isn't wasted, lad. Whatever happens here, we'll see it through to the end. The battle began as Steelheart's corrupted fleet attacked from all sides, their vessels moving with unnatural coordination as sea witch magic propelled them up the amphitheater's curved walls. But Buccaneer, standing at the Crimson Revenge's prow with Poseidon's trident blazing in his hooves, met their assault with divine power that had shaped the oceans since the world was young. His first strike sent a pillar of water rising from the sea's depth, catching one of the enemy vessels and crushing it like an eggshell in a titan's grip. The second attack summoned creatures from the deepest trenches, not the corrupted beings that served Steelheart, but ancient guardians of the ocean's purity who had been waiting eons for the chance to cleanse the waters of such pollution. Impossible, Steelheart shrieked, his inhuman voice carrying across the supernatural battlefield. The old compacts are broken. The sea gods no longer intervene in mortal affairs. But Buccaneer's response came not in words but in action that proved how wrong the corrupted captain had been. The trident's power flowed through him, transforming the donkey into something that seemed to embody the ocean's own wrath and majesty. Where before he had been impressive, now he was transcendent, a living avatar of the sea's power to both create and destroy. The gateway at the amphitheater's center began to fluctuate as Buccaneer's divine power disrupted the dark ritual. The tentacled horrors that had been pressing through from their hellish realm found themselves pushed back by waves of purifying energy that burned their corrupted flesh like acid. The ritual fails. One of the sea witches screamed from her vessel, "The gateway closes, our patrons abandon us." Indeed, the supernatural allies that Steelheart had gathered began to flee as they realized the tide of battle had turned decisively against them. But the corrupted captain himself, driven beyond sanity by the sword's influence and his own consuming hatred, raised his cursed weapon for one final desperate attack. "If I cannot have victory," he snarled, "then let us all perish together. The Kraken's tooth will drink divine blood, even if it costs me my existence." The clash between Poseidon's trident and the Kraken's tooth sword sent shockwaves through both the natural and supernatural realms, a confrontation between creation and destruction that would determine the fate of both land and sea. The final clash between Poseidon's trident and the Kraken's tooth sword sent shockwaves that cracked the very foundations of the supernatural amphitheater. As divine light battled cursed darkness, the sea itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which force would prove stronger. But it was not raw power alone that decided the outcome. It was the purity of purpose that had guided Buccaneer from the moment Finn first showed him kindness on that storm-lashed shore. The trident's 3 tines pierced through the sword's dark aura, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, creation and destruction hung in perfect balance. Then, with a sound like the birth of stars, Poseidon's weapon shattered the cursed blade into fragments that dissolved instantly in the purifying waters. Steelheart's inhuman scream echoed across the collapsing amphitheater as the sword's destruction released him from its corrupting influence. For just a moment, his original human form flickered back into existence, and in his eyes was the horror of full understanding of what he had become and what he had done. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of normalizing waters. Then the sea claimed him, and Captain Magnus Steelheart sank beneath waves that closed over his head with merciful finality. As the supernatural battlefield collapsed back into ordinary ocean, beings who had watched from the realm between worlds began to make themselves known. The crew of the Crimson Revenge found their vessel surrounded by figures of light and majesty, not fully materialized, but present enough to make their recognition unmistakable. Poseidon himself, Captain Redbeard, whispered, his weathered face pale with awe as he recognized the towering figure whose beard seemed to be woven from sea foam and whose eyes held the depth of all oceans. Beside the sea god stood Athena, her owl perched on her shoulder, her armor gleaming with wisdom's light. And with them came others, heroes of legend, whose names had echoed through history, each accompanied by their faithful donkey companions who had shared their adventures and their glory. But it was the crown that materialized in the space between divine and mortal realms that commanded everyone's attention, forged from what appeared to be crystallized starlight and ocean foam. It was clearly meant for Buccaneer, though its weight seemed to carry responsibility as much as honor. The crown of Sea Lords, Athena's voice, carried across the water with divine authority, symbol of guardianship over all who sail the seas, worn by those who stand between the mortal world and the forces that would consume it. Poseidon's deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Noble Buccaneer, last son of the heroic bloodlines, you have proven yourself worthy of the highest honors. Will you accept the crown and the duties it represents?" Buccaneer, still glowing with residual power from the trident, approached the floating crown with the dignity that had marked all his actions since Finn first rescued him from the wreckage. But before he could respond, he turned his thoughts toward his human companions. "The choice is not mine alone to make," he told the assembled gods. "Through their mental link, I have learned that true nobility comes not from bloodline or divine favor, but from the bonds we forge with those who choose to stand beside us. My crew, my family, must be part of any decision that affects our future." The gods exchanged glances that spoke of surprise and growing respect. It was Athena who responded first, her wisdom recognizing something unprecedented in the donkey's words. "You would share divine responsibility with mortals?" she asked. "You would bind your fate to theirs, knowing that their lives are brief, while yours could span centuries?" "I would," Buccaneer replied without hesitation, "for they have already proven themselves worthy of such trust." Finn showed compassion when he could have walked away. Captain Redbeard granted sanctuary when he could have chosen profit. Tommy, Pete, Sam, and all the rest have transformed themselves from selfish pirates into protectors of the innocent. If I am to wear a crown, let it represent not just my nobility, but theirs as well. The crown of Sea Lords pulsed with brighter light, as if responding to Buccaneer's words. When it finally settled upon his head, It seemed to extend its radiance to encompass the entire crew, marking each of them as guardians under his protection and partners in his divine mission. "So be it," Poseidon declared, his approval evident in the calming of the seas around them. "Let the chronicles record that the crown of sea lords was claimed not by conquest, but by compassion, not through violence, but through the bonds of loyalty that make mortals worthy of divine friendship." As the gods began to fade back into their own realm, Athena's final words carried a promise that echoed across the now peaceful waters. "The sea lanes are under your protection now, noble guardians. May your legend inspire others to choose compassion over cruelty, loyalty over greed." The crew of the Crimson Revenge found themselves alone on ordinary ocean once more. But they were no longer ordinary pirates. They were legend now, protectors bearing the blessing of the gods themselves, with adventures yet to come that would make their names echo through the ages. Years had passed since the battle at the Convergence Point, and the legend of the Crimson Revenge had spread to every port from the Caribbean to the Mediterranean. Finn, now a man grown and bearing the wisdom that comes from walking alongside divinity, sat in the ship's cabin with a leather-bound tome spread before him on the captain's desk. The Chronicle of Heroes, as it had come to be known, contained their story written in Finn's careful script, a testament to the power of compassion and the bonds that can form between the most unlikely of companions. "Are you certain you want to include that part about my early seasickness?" Captain Redbeard asked with a chuckle, reading over Finn's shoulder as the young man added another chapter to their ongoing chronicle. The old pirate's hair had gone completely white, but his eyes still sparkled with the vitality of a man who had found purpose beyond mere survival. "Every detail matters," Finn replied, dipping his quill in the inkwell once more. "Future generations need to understand that we weren't heroes from the beginning. We became heroes through the choices we made, the friendships we honored, and the compassion we showed to a creature who seemed to have nothing to offer but his need for kindness." Through the cabin windows they could see Buccaneer standing at the ship's prow, his golden bridle catching the morning sunlight while the crown of Sea Lords rested regally upon his head. The divine donkey was watching the horizon with that same alert intelligence that had first caught Finn's attention on the storm-battered shores of Tortuga. But now his bearing carried the unmistakable authority of one who had been chosen by the gods themselves. The crew had changed as well, each man transformed by their adventures into something far greater than they had ever imagined possible. Tommy Hayes had become their navigator, using skills that seemed almost supernatural in their accuracy. Blackjack Pete served as their diplomat, his rough charm proving surprisingly effective in negotiations with port authorities and merchant captains. Even Rotgut Sam had found his calling as the ship's chronicler of rescued animals, for their reputation had begun attracting creatures in need from across the seven seas. "The real question," Captain Redbeard continued, settling into his chair with the comfortable ease of a man at peace with his choices, "is how we end the story. Do we write it as if our adventures are finished, or do we leave it open for the chapters yet to come?" Finn smiled, his pen hovering over the page as he considered the question. "I think we write it as a beginning rather than an ending. After all, every port we visit brings new stories of people who need protection, creatures who require rescue, and bullies who need to learn that their victims aren't as helpless as they appear." Indeed, their reputation had grown far beyond anything they could have anticipated. Ships flying the black flag now changed course when they spotted the Crimson Revenge on the horizon, not from fear of being plundered, but from shame at facing those who represented a higher standard of conduct on the seas. Merchant captains sought them out for protection during dangerous voyages, and coastal villages welcomed them as honored guests rather than threats to be endured. "Read me the ending you've written so far," Redbeard requested, settling back to listen. Finn cleared his throat and began. What began as a simple act of compassion on a storm-tossed shore became something that changed not just our crew, but our understanding of what it means to be truly noble. We learned that heroism isn't found in bloodline or birthright, but in the daily choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Buccaneer taught us that loyalty freely given is worth more than obedience demanded by force, and that the bonds between different species, human and divine donkey, can become stronger than any forged by mere shared ancestry. He paused, looking up at Captain Redbeard's weathered face. Should I add more about our specific adventures or focus on the larger lessons? Both, the captain decided. But make sure you emphasize that this isn't the end of our story. We're still sailing, still learning, still growing into the roles the gods chose for us. Every sunrise brings new possibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove ourselves worthy of the trust placed in us. As if summoned by their conversation, Buccaneer's mental voice reached them both. A ship in distress, 2 leagues to the southeast. Their distress signal suggests they're under attack by pirates, who haven't yet learned that the age of predators preying on the innocent has passed. Finn closed the Chronicle of Heroes carefully, wrapping it in oiled cloth to protect it from sea spray. Then it's time to add another chapter to our legend. Captain Redbeard rose from his chair with the vigor of a man half his age, his hand moving to the medallion that marked him as one of their brotherhood. Aye, and may every chapter we add inspire others to choose compassion over cruelty, protection over predation. As the Crimson Revenge changed course toward their next adventure, the Chronicle of Heroes remained safely stored in the cabin, ready to record whatever new legends they would create together on the endless sea.